to me because I know that this topic of AI-powered change is so important to all of us now. And I know that here at MIT, we've been very busy developing new programs and rolling out new programs here in executive education to help busy executives like yourselves learn more about AI and how to tackle this both at a personal and professional level. And in the next hour, we're going to try and do just that. If we could go to the next slide. Really have a very meaningful program set up for you today. We're going to be talking about unlocking the creative transformation during AI-powered change. And I can't think of a better faculty member to have joining us today than Hal Gregersen. I've worked closely with Hal over the last decade here at MIT, and together we've launched a number of very important executive education programs. But in the last couple of years in particular, it's been a real honor for me to be working with Hal to see the work and research that he's doing around how AI is changing everything at the individual level, at the organizational level. And Hal is perfectly positioned to do just this. He's a senior lecturer here at MIT Sloan, and he's formerly led the MIT Leadership Center. He's a fellow at Innosight and co-founder of the Innovators DNA Consulting Group. Another wonderful thing about Hal is his global perspective and experience. He's taught at some of the top schools around the world, as well as his time here at MIT Sloan, and he really does bring a very global perspective to all that he does. He's launched many new programs, as I mentioned, here at MIT Sloan, and he's also co-authored or authored several influential books, such as The Innovator's DNA, or more recently, Questions Are the Answers. In his research and his work, he's worked with some of the top companies from around the world. He's interviewed countless CEOs and senior executives on leadership, and he's really immersed himself very deeply in the topic of AI and how it's changing everything. So as we go to the next slide, some of the key takeaways we're hoping for today for you is that you'll gain insights into adapting and evolving skills and roles, identities in response to exponential change. You'll also understand the emotional impact of AI and ways to manage those impacts effectively during periods of creative transformation. And lastly, because we're MIT, we want to make it practical. We want you to have some tips and tools, some frameworks that you can take away from the webinar today to creatively navigate the complexities introduced by generative AI and rapidly changing technologies. As mentioned earlier, if you have questions, we'll try to address those throughout the program, but especially at the end, we'll hope to leave some time to get to as many questions as we can. So please don't be shy in terms of submitting your questions through the question box. With that, Hal, thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear more about what you're thinking in this space.
Rob, thank you very much, and the whole team for your support to make this a reality. And thank you around the world for joining us. I've got excuse me, a little bit of a frog in my throat today. I had COVID last week. I'm on the mend, but I was not going to not do this. So we're going to pull it off. We're going to make it work, and hopefully in a very positive way, make a difference for you. So we all know that this movie has been an incredible blockbuster around the world. And it's very related to what we're talking about today, which is in a world that is rapidly, exponentially, and in a compound way changing, how do we gain deeper insight? And how do we do that with generative AI? Now, this movie wouldn't have happened without the person sitting in the middle of this photograph I took a couple of months ago at NVIDIA's headquarters. Ed Catmull, one of the co-founders of Pixar, he cracked the code mathematically to make 3D animation work on a screen. So when you and I went and saw, if you saw Inside Out 2, that never would have happened without Ed's mathematical work. And the kind of things we saw on that screen also would not have happened without the deep collaboration between Ed and Jensen Huang on the left, co-founder and president, CEO of NVIDIA, who both care deeply about pushing the edge of storytelling, computing, and the world we're now living in the middle of. At this particular session, they were looking back historically at what had been going on in terms of technology, and especially 3D graphics. Elliot Fishman, a radiologist who's deeply engaged with Jensen Huang and NVIDIA around radiology in the medical world, he also is exploring the following questions. Historically, looking back, we've all heard of Moore's Law. We know what that is. We know this sense of transistors sitting on a chip. Supposedly, we're going to be doubling every couple of years. But if you look at the actual performance to price ratio over the last 50 years of computing, it's literally been a 40 to 50% annual compound growth rate for 50 years. Just step back and let that settle in for 2 seconds. A lot of us would be happy to get 10% annual growth on an annual basis on our retirement income and our retirement accounts. We're talking 40 to 50% growth every year for over 50 years. Now, as we look forward to the future and the implications of that kind of compounding growth, sometimes we call it exponential, but compounding for me is more powerful. It sneaks up on you if you're not watching before it comes. If you look at these devices like iPhones and Android phones, arguably in the next 10 years are going to be 100 times faster with their computing speed. If you look at the aggregate computing speed in the last 10 years, it's increased by 1,000,000-fold. If we look at the next 10 years, 1,000,000-fold increase is predicted on the aggregate computing speed. The biggest question leaders need to ask themselves is, number one, do I understand that kind of compounding change and its implications for me, my team, and my organization? And if I recognize those implications, how do I think about those things? And how do I get to the reality of it for myself and others as we are navigating these transitions? Case in point example, generative AI. And as I'm navigating those transitions, if we have time today, how do I make sure that I'm actually discerning the truth, the reality, what's really going on in the situation, when that reality is changing faster than we can blink our eyes? We've all heard the word change is changing. I'm old enough by my bald head and my gray hair to have heard that a lot of times over the course of my life. And I often rolled my eyes and didn't believe it. This is one of those moments in my lifetime, at least, where the data are overwhelming and convincing. It is different today. One of those things, generative AI. We go back to 2022. None of us in this webinar today probably were doing much with it. Maybe a few on the edges were, but not the core of us. In a matter of less than a year, this particular intersection of that computing speed growth over the course of decades, combined with algorithms that are decades old, combined with use cases, combined with data that we never had before in terms of its volume and breadth and depth, all of those things combined mean that we're trying to navigate an incredibly uncertain terrain. Here's what these folks do, just for what it's worth, as we go through and move forward on navigating transitions. They recognize the implications of compound growth. They are not short-term oriented. They choose long-term goals and intents. They do very deep work that's value-driven, and they don't do it alone. They engage with others in learning cycles, intelligent failures, as Amy Edmondson would put it, to reinforce that over and over as they solve challenges to make big things happen. So literally, when I was sitting there, I heard Jensen Huang asking Ed in the animation world, asking Elliot in the radiology healthcare world, tell us, how is generative AI influencing your world? What are the implications of that? And then he just shut up and listened, because he's trying to figure out what is the next wave that's coming beyond generative AI. It's literally, how do you gain deeper insight when the world is changing so fast? And I played with this photographically last week when I was in London doing some work with Chanel, where it's like, how do I use this incredibly slow shutter speed when the world is moving around me and try to keep something stable? How do I make these sorts of transitions? For the last decade, I've had the glorious luxury, no pun intended, of working with folks at Chanel who are doing really interesting cutting edge things, including with technology. Lena Nair, the new CEO, is not only trying to help technology be part of their world more so than ever before, but she herself is going through enormous transitions as the CEO of Chanel. Just look at it. This is her quote recently. One of my mentors when I was moving said, remember, Lena, you're doing a quadruple jump. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you're changing sectors, public to private. You're changing an Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Dutch heritage, which she had at Unilever, to a French heritage. You're changing from leading HR to CEO. It's like a quadruple jump. Most people in their careers don't do quadruple jumps at once. So how are you thinking about each of these transitions? Do not think about transition in general. Think about each of them and plan. That's a really interesting way of approaching the world. And that's what we're going to talk about today in relationship to especially the impact of technology and generative AI. So just for a moment, think of how many major transitions you've been through in your life. For what it's worth, I've been through a few. Just let me rapidly tell you. 3 continents I've lived on, 5 countries, 21 cities, 48 homes, 3 businesses I've started, 11 universities I've worked at, 20 full-time and part-time jobs. On the personal side, I've had the unfortunate, because my first wife passed away, and fortunate because I found a wonderful wife now, 2 marriages, 7 children combining that, 6 spouses of those children, 15 grandchildren, 2 more on the way, and 2 Burman cats living upstairs. Every one of those things was a transition for me. I love this book. It's a really cool book. Life is in the transitions. Basically, if you're average, I'm maybe a little bit above average, like some of you on this call, but basically on this webinar, what we're talking about here is that what he discovered in his research is that the average transition is 5 years. And each of us make a major transition every 5 years. And as a result, life is in the transition. Now, none of us, I would argue, or relatively few of us, have encountered in all of these transitions the challenge, literally, of how do we navigate technology, especially generative AI, that has deep implications for everyone in the world. But as Eric Ben-Jolson, who used to be at MIT, now at Stanford, and colleagues of others around the world doing the research on this, is basically saying, it's going to impact the creatives, the people that are doing really professional work, probably faster than anybody else. It's you and me. We're the ones getting impacted by this. It is a huge transition. And even though I've got all these things in my transition heritage and database, wow, I don't have that one. It's a new one. So here we go. How can we navigate that a little bit better? Couple of things to suggest. I took this again, one of those moving, slow shutter speed photographs in Lisbon. This woman's incredibly contemplative looking out the window and has that sense of intentionality. Be intentional about these transitions. Lena said, I'll be more intentional about thinking about transitions along all of these dimensions. And let's talk about what those dimensions are. So you probably have a model that you're operating with around change and transitions. I've got mine. Part of it comes from my own personal transitions. Part of it comes from studying early on in my career for a decade, global leadership, people moving from country to country. Then putting that to practice, as I mentioned, then doing some more research, especially with a colleague, Roger Lehman, where we're literally in the midst of writing a book that should be finished by next year with an article in Sloan Management Review about the kind of framework we're talking about. That framework, you can find it in the work we've done in these 3 courses, the first 2 especially. And so here we go on trying to explore what does that framework look like. First of all, when change happens, we inevitably and usually have to let go of some role and take on a new one. We have to let go of capabilities and skills that are bundled up to make those roles and take on new capabilities. We have to let go of evolving identities because when roles and capabilities shift, who we are changes and take on new ones. Those 4 words, let go, take on, are probably the most important ones as we approach and navigate our way through change and transition. Now, when we're doing that, it's not easy emotionally, and it requires energy. And if we don't manage and attend to that element of the change from start to finish, every point of the way, we can get really low. Like I did when I lived in France for 3 years, everything had changed for me professionally, personally, familially, culturally, everything. And I didn't manage it very well and ended up being moderately to severely depressed for months. It was not a good moment. And I hope that we can all navigate that better. So that's the model, that's the notion, and that's the approach. And before we go on, any questions so far as you think about what is one of your toughest transitions right now? It's probably related to AI. That's why you're here on this webinar today. But anything you want to query me with, Rob, from the thing so far?
Yeah, Hal, I've got a question, but we also encourage people to use the Q&A box if you'd like to submit your question. But Hal, one came to mind for me, and I appreciate you sharing your personal details as well. Do you have any sense in terms of the number of transitions that people can expect, or with technology changing, is the frequency of transitions happening more rapidly?
The number and the work that, I think this is really cool. It's a really great book. It's good research-based work. And his, like I said, was the number historically was every 5 years a major transition. And we have these that often. It takes about 5 years for us from start to finish to navigate through all of those roles and identities and capabilities and so on. Going forward, my honest hunch is it's going to be faster and more radical. Because again, these things are explosive. They're taking off in ways that, even from a mathematical point of view, an exponential function, when this compounding growth takes off, the nature of it is such that it is unpredictable. We can't control it. We might think we can, but we can't. And this is why it's so hard for most senior executives who love to be in control and have predictability, is we're now moving into a space because of the nature of the technology and this compounding growth that there are going to be positive and negative consequences that we can't predict. There are going to be, there's going to be things we can control and things we can't. And so I'm reminded of a quote by George Box, a statistician, which I love, which is the only way to know how a complex system will behave after you change it, is to change it and see how it behaves. And so for me, Rob, that's really strong advice for us individually in transition, for our teams in transition, for our organizations, even for our families. It's like, I want to be more attentive than ever before in my lifetime around not only what's going on out there, but what's going on in here.
That's great, Hal. Thank you. We've had a couple people ask if we can make the books you're suggesting a list available. So maybe after the webinar, I know we'll send out a link with a recording to this. Maybe we can include a reading list that you might suggest as well for people that are interested in reading more.
No, absolutely. And this, Rob, is you've been so supportive over the years here at MIT of these different programs that we put together. But I mentioned Ed Catmull before, and if there's any top 5 books on creativity and innovation, it's sitting right back there, Creativity Inc., which, Ed and I are doing a program in October about this creative transformation, especially around technology and change and so on. And so, yeah, we'll put that together. Sound good?
Great. Yeah, that's perfect. I know we have a couple more questions rolling in, but let's go ahead. I know you still have more material to cover, so let's proceed and I'll return to some of these questions.
Keep rolling. Thanks, Rob, for your flexibility. And thanks, everyone. I wish we had 2 days together, join us for a program, but there's so many more questions than we have time for, and that's way cool because I love questions. So here we go. First element, adjusting roles. It's really cool that the word role comes from 17th century French, where they would literally give a roll of paper with the lines on it to an actor in a play. That's a really interesting way of thinking about a role we take on and let go. I was recently visiting a friend in Stirling, Scotland. He's there on the left. It was an amazing experience. We went to the castle there, ended up visiting different people, watched what they were doing. They were playing the roles, taking on the roles of these people from the way, way past in the castle. And then once they left, my friend Paul ended up basically taking on the role, even though he's a consultant at EY, he took on the role of a different role here within the castle, trying to teach my wife and me about the castle. So roles are things, they're expected behaviors, duties, norms with a particular position. They're socially defined. I mentioned Jensen Huang earlier. He's taken on a lot of different roles in his life. Weeder, toilet cleaner, dishwasher, busboy, waiter, university student, engineer, graduate student, director of microprocessors, and founder and co-founder of and CEO of a company. The one common role we had, two common roles we had that I discovered 2 months ago in talking with Jensen was we were both good when we were younger at toilet cleaning and dishwashing. We both had those jobs when we were kids, growing up, just trying to figure out a way to make it all work. But a variety of different roles. And what's really fun is that even though Jensen is currently the co-founder, president, CEO of NVIDIA, afterwards at an event, I watched him be a rock star having his picture taken, a role. I watched him being a host, as you can see here, serving food. I watched him making sure that there was enough food when it ran out. I watched him bust the tables afterwards. And as a valet role, he walked us literally out to our cars. And he was a friend, a long-term friend to Ed Catmull and Elliot Fishman. And it was cool to watch him seamlessly move amongst all of these different roles. Very unique. So think of the roles you take on, you let go. Think of the AI world we live in. One of those roles that actually a lot of us are being forced with change to take on is to let go of a tell role as a leader and take on an ask role, which a good colleague, Ed Schein, and his son Peter have written a book, Humble Inquiry, about this, but this is the notion. In this kind of generative AI world, part of the impact is it influences how we lead. And one of the things we need to stop is being a tell leader, thinking we know everything. How can I stop doing that? Why will I continue? What's the motivation for continuing to not do it? How do I actually become a better questioner? How can I do it? Why would I continue doing that? And one of the courses we run here at MIT with Rob and others is Questions Are the Answer, which actually is a 2-day deep dive on this whole inquiry thing, including with artificial intelligence. Let me give you a sense of that. One of the tools we have in that course is a question burst, where you ask nothing but questions about your challenge for 3 or 4 minutes. But when I hit really tough challenges, big, serious ones, like I did recently in a huge project I was engaged with, I spend about an hour and a half alone generating 100 questions as fast as I can. No answers, no explanations to myself. I just write them down and number them to try to get 100 questions. Now, here's what I did with those questions at the end of it, hoping to make some progress. I gave them, in this case, to ChatGPT and said, please summarize the themes. Well, inadequacy and failure, resistance to change. You can see some of the themes. Then I said, well, wow, what are some of the key questions that might be asked here to move this thing forward? And it actually gave me some good questions to consider out of my questions. And then I'm like, well, what are some of the concerns and shadows you've got about this character, Hal Gregersen, and the project he's working on, and why he's so stuck? And again, it gave me some good summary kind of elements of shadow. And then I'm like, whoa, that's a good summarizer role that generative AI just played with me. And you know that from your world, but if we give a good prompt, it can give us some really interesting direction about the roles we're taking on and letting go. Now, what's really fascinating, the coaching role, where we get other people to help us in the transition. I was doing some work again in London a few months ago, earlier this year, with Azim Azhar, with a company called FM Global. And Azim's written this powerful book about exponential age. And in the course of his presentation, he's like, I've actually identified public persona that I would love to have their perspective on my challenges. I'm like, that's cool. So I was thinking about my big challenge, my 100-question marathon. I'm like, wonder what Freud would think of this. Good question. This would be his question. And frankly, there are some unresolved conflicts that are keeping me stuck in these professional things. I really adore Carolyn Dweck and the growth mindset work. So I'm like, what would she say? What are your strategies for persisting? I love Ellen Langer's mindfulness work. What would she say? Well, how might you put it differently if you were more mindful in the situation? I love Parker Palmer, an educational philosopher. It really sounded like Palmer talking to me. And even Steve Jobs, I'm like, what would he say? And way, way back, a century ago, Mary Parker Follett lived here in Boston, a woman consultant in the early 1900s, respected by business people, politicians, union leaders, all of them, because she really understood dynamics in people. This is probably what she would ask. That's really cool. So you might want to consider, who are some of your cool people that you would love to pull into your world? So as you think about that, it's just like, think of your world, your roles. What are you letting go of? What are you taking, where are you on that curve? That letting go, taking on. Think about taking on roles. What is one of the most important or new roles you're taking on? Where are you on that curve? And, hopefully you can be, oops, not that, not him, is to remember that, when we're doing this, taking on and letting go, it's just mastering the role to learn it from the inside out, even with AI, and make it work. And so that's kind of where we're at on the roles. I find that my engagement with AI is causing me to shift and change my roles. And, maybe I have some questions about that. Rob, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we've got several questions coming in, and one that I think is very relevant is from looks like Jaime or Jamie. Speed changes everything. Roles and capabilities are more easy to change. How do you deal with identities? How do you define it in the first place?
I'm going to put a hold on that, Rob, because we're going to actually tackle that head on in a few minutes. Honestly, we will. So,
All right.
anything else?
Great. Well, another one. How do you think, this is from Chris, Hal, how do you think we as technology leaders can help ensure access to educational tools and learning does not become more unequal as the pace of change continues to accelerate?
Absolutely. So, in the spirit of inequality at one level, a school like MIT has incredible resources around this issue of generative AI and incorporating it into our work and roles. And when that came online last spring in 2023 for a lot of faculty, many of us didn't know how to incorporate it well into our courses. So, as a system, they literally set up individual coaches if required, training seminars, access points, ways of sharing what you're doing. They had this very intensive, exhaustive approach to make it possible for people, even within our MIT system, who had this sense of, I'm not one of those high-tech people that really do what I need to do this. And the resources were provided to do that. And all I can say is, and this is really fascinating, I did a thing with coaching.com a few months ago where I asked them, how many of you have, there were literally like 10,000, 20, 10, 15,000 coaches on the webinar. And I asked them to do a survey assessment around, well, how many of you have used generative AI in your coaching role work? The answer was about 50%. Some of them made conscious choices they never wanted to integrate it, but a lot of them had never tried it. And so there's an inequality going on. And my response on that, Rob, is yes, this technology holds all of the possibility of increasing an already unequal world. And so that's why I'm here. That's why we're here from my perspective, because every one of us can be catalysts for change. If we get good at it, ripple effect it, man, which is provide opportunities for a lot of other people to learn from what you're doing, engage your team, engage your family, engage your grandkids, engage your neighbors. It's like enable other people to do this. And that's my only hope in order to make a higher probability that more inequality won't be the consequence.
Great. Thank you, Hal.
Should we move on?
Sure.
Okay. So, an obvious role shift is when we move from technical contributor to manager of individual contributors to manager, a functional manager, to then becoming a general manager, senior executive, CEO, and so on. And a simple thing like this is like, wow, when I moved from being a technical engineer to a manager of engineers or marketers or whatever, I've got to learn how to get things done through people. And I've got to learn how to really enjoy that. Really good questions like, do I love to get things done for other people? Do I love and enjoy their success as much as mine? If I agree to that, then I'm going to be a decent manager. And if I don't agree to those questions, frankly, stay away from management. But when I make that choice, I'm in for the good on this, and I'm in for the long haul. That I'm getting stuff done through other people, and I'm excited when they succeed. And trust me, someone like Ed Catmull is super excited when Inside Out 2 takes off across the world. So, capabilities. They're a tighter, narrower skill range. Sometimes their skills even more narrow, but this notion of roles or bundles of all these skills and capabilities. Now, in the world of what we were talking about earlier, it's really this notion of boom, we've got to seek the truth all the time. How do we do that? One of the people that Ed and I have talked to is Demis Hassabis, and one of the hardest things is asking those systems the right question. You know that, I know that. It's easier said than done. Even here, it's like as human beings, as kids, we came out of the womb, we were born with this questioning capacity. It's how we learn. And as little kids, we ask hundreds of thousands of questions to try to figure out the world we live in. And then we often grow up as adults and forgot how to do that. Hopefully you got it back. But now with these tools like generative AI, it's like not only do we have to pay attention to the questioning, we have to do it even better than ever before. So, for most of my life, way the most of my life, I ask questions without AI. So what does that mean for me or you what do I let go of when I was doing it that way, questioning without AI? And how can I actually ask better questions as a human being if I pulled AI into my world? Where would I start? How could I do that? Why would I do that? Now, let me just give you a quick sort of a way of thinking about this. Um, so this question burst method I discovered with the Questions of the Answer book, where effectively great questions cause us to be wrong and surprised and uncomfortable and quiet and reflective. And if you literally, after this webinar, have a challenge, and if you got out a piece of paper or if you got out your computer or your phone, and it's like, this is my challenge, and set a timer for 4 minutes. And if you don't answer any of your questions and you don't explain to yourself why you're asking those questions, you will get about 20 questions, 5 questions per minute. Some of them might make you uncomfortable. Now, you can do that yourself, you can do it with others. I happened to be with a good friend of mine, and we were talking about some issues at a restaurant, and he said, I've got a great relationship with my oldest daughter, but she's becoming a teenager, and her oldest daughter is starting to pull away. Sounds like Inside Out too. And he said to me at dinner, how can I keep my relationship strong with her? And he honestly meant it. And I said back to him, well, there's this really fun thing I do when I'm, stuck. I call the question burst, and let's try it. He's like, okay. I explained it to him. We grabbed some napkins, grabbed a pen, and started 4 minutes of asking nothing but questions. These were the questions. He is okay with me sharing them. He agreed to this. The darker orange ones are his questions. Do I listen? Do I tend to solve too much? Do I push too hard? Do I hover, control, helicopter too much? That took about a minute. Then he's quiet. I asked, what is she best at? His response, do I recognize that? Then he's really quiet for another minute. I ask more questions. My neck's a little sore, so that's why I'm rubbing it. Now, 2 minutes is up. He asks, am I a good father? And he really meant it. He was being sincere, authentic about that question. And then he was super quiet for 2 more minutes. We don't have time to go through all those, but the questions make me even today rethink my role as a father and grandfather. He was really quiet at the end, and he said, that beginning question was all about me, basically. How can I keep my relationship good with my daughter? He said, the real question is, how can I help her be her? Now, that question ended up helping him have a better relationship than he probably would have had if he'd stuck with the old question. This was a few years ago, pre-generative AI. Recently, I'm like, I wonder how that might have helped us. How might we use this amazing tool and skill and approach as human beings to ask questions about challenges to move forward if we use generative AI? So I popped these 20 questions in. I explained the challenge, and I said, give me 20 more questions. They're long. Frankly, they're exhausting. And I'm like, that's too much. And I did another prompt. Shorten them, 8, 10 words. Make them really short. Much better. Very focused. Very helpful, actually. Nothing really groundbreaking, but it helped me understand the terrain a little better. And then I asked, out of all those 60 questions, what are the top three and why? It's a really important prompt. Am I listening to try and fix it without trying to fix? How can I respect her privacy more? And what fears might she be facing? Then explain, here's why they're in that order. Here's why they matter. And it was actually a reasonably good explanation, honestly. That's helpful. And then I'm like, this was cool. And then I'm like, out of all those questions, his initial question was, how can I keep my relationship strong with my daughter? And I said, of all those questions, what's the one question that would be most important for my friend to be asking? And the question was, what can I do every day to show her that I value and respect her evolving identity? That was ChatGPT's summary, which is synonymous with his question. How can I help her be her? When I did that, I'm like, I got chills from me, like, whoa, that came to a very human conclusion in a very cool way. Now, I also was like, well, how could I, well, we'll skip through that. Then I'm like, how could I talk with my friend and work through some of these challenges, be more supportive as a friend? What might be some questions that I could ask? Well, how do you feel about the changes in your relationship with your teenager? What does a strong relationship with your daughter look like? In what ways have you responded to her need for more independence and so on? Like, that's a pretty good coaching guide set. Not bad. Now, for what it's worth, my friend and I, pre and post generative AI, it's like the important and difficult job is never to find the right question, is to find the right answer. The right answer is to find the right question. We got that backwards. There's nothing more dangerous or useless than the right answer to the wrong question. And in today's world, there's nothing more useless and dangerous as the wrong answer to the right question. So either way, we've got to think very carefully about questions. Now, here's my summary on this skill of questioning. When ChatGPT came out early last year, I'm like, cool, I could give it my challenges and it can generate the questions before I do. That'd be interesting. But when I did that, folks, I realized not cool. It's like, uh-oh, crap. I could feel somewhere in my brain, I could sense that if I give my challenges to the computer and tell it to give me the questions first, I'm losing something. I'm losing an ability to ask questions. I'm losing an ability to formulate it. And after 4 or 5 times trying it, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it that way. And I swerved back to, I'm going to keep writing down the challenge, asking as many questions as I can, exhaust my brain, keep the muscle strong of questioning, and then I'll explore in a collaborative way, I'll explore with AI how we're going to approach this. That'd be a much better way of doing it. And as I did it that way, it felt better. I felt in control, and I felt like it was a collaborative tool instead of a corruptive tool. And I think in the end, it's my personal vendetta here. It's just like, with all these technologies and especially generative AI, the last thing I want to lose when I wake up in the morning is my human ability to ask questions. And for me, it's the skills that we use in a very specific way that actually roll up into the roles we play and take on and the identities we have. Rob, questions?
Yeah, that's actually perfect for me to return to an earlier question that came up in the thread, Hal, and that's what North Stars, and I think you started to allude to this a little bit in terms of not wanting to lose the human involvement in this type of process, but what North Stars do you recommend people hold on to during periods of disruptive change?
The George Box quote. It's about how do you know how a complex system will behave after you change it? Well, is to change it and see how it behaves. It's to be incredibly observant. I was I was literally, recently driving about 5 miles away from where I live here north of Boston. It was the end of the day. The sun went down. My phone went dead. I was in the middle of a neighborhood, and I had no idea where I was. And even though I was in a relatively benign neighborhood and place, it was just like, crap. I have lost my ability to keep in my mind a mental navigation framework for where I'm going. I'd given it to that stupid phone. And that's when I started realizing I don't want to have that happen to my questioning ability. And so it's this reflective vigilance that we don't normally do, that we need now more than ever before. We often hear the phrase, don't just stand there, do something. In a world of rapid change, actually, it's better, don't just do something, stand there for a second or two. Much, much better.
And Hal, do you have any sense in terms of the technology? We've already seen improvements in the quality of generative AI and how people interact with it. You know, you mentioned a little bit about doing some of your own prompt engineering to try and get the best output. But do you have any sense of how the technology is changing in the future, and will that impact how people interact with generative AI?
Well, Ethan Mollick is another one of those books, Co-Intelligence. I mean, Ethan was so an MIT grad, is now at Wharton, but man, Ethan is the expert in that space, Rob. He is so good at, the cutting edge. I would follow him, I would watch him carefully, and he's super helpful at keeping people up with that kind of where are all these things changing and where are they going. So that would be my strongest recommendation. Does that help, Rob?
Yeah, I think very much so. And I know I'm keeping track of the time. We only have about 15 minutes left, so I don't want to cut you short in terms of what you want to present.
Okay, great. So we're going to move to the identity question that got asked earlier. And effectively, identity is a little different. Identity is it's a mixture of skills, capabilities, roles, but at the end of the day, it's a personal sense of who we are. It's our self-perception and how we're unique from other people. And so, I'm at an age where we're asking identity questions about who do we become when we transition to different places. This is an identity question, really interesting one. Lee Sedol, goal player, winner, world titles. He was the character who played AlphaGo, which was DeepMind's algorithm and computer trying to win in the Go game. And here's a short summary, if you've never seen it, of a 90-minute documentary on YouTube. Fantastic. It's well worth it. Watch it sometime this week if you've never seen it. But here's what. Now, as we watch it, it's like you'll see him really engaging with the technology powerfully towards the end.
Go is the world's oldest continuously played board game. It is one of the simplest and also most abstract.
Beating a professional player at Go is a long-standing challenge of artificial intelligence.
Everything we've ever tried in AI just falls over when you try the game of Go.
The number of possible
Now, can you turn up the volume a bit?
Is more than the number of atoms in the universe.
AlphaGo found a way to learn how to play Go.
So far, AlphaGo has beaten every challenge we've given it, but we won't know its true strength until we play somebody who is at the top of the world, like Lee Sedol.
A match like no other is about to get underway in South Korea.
Lee Sedol is to Go what Roger Federer is to tennis.
Just the very thought of a machine playing a human is inherently intriguing.
The place is a madhouse.
Welcome to the DeepMind Challenge.
The whole world is watching.
Can Lee Sedol find AlphaGo's weakness? Whoa. Is there, in fact, a weakness?
The game kind of turned on its axis.
Look at his face.
That is not a confident face.
It's developing into a very, very dangerous fight.
Ooh, hold the phone. Lee has left the room.
In the end, it is about pride.
I think something went wrong.
Yeah, it's made a mistake.
He's got to pronounce America.
These ideas that are driving AlphaGo are going to drive our future.
This is it, folks.
Now, at the end of that, before we get to that quote, is basically in those 5-game series, he and colleagues did some very careful analysis of how the computer played the game. They learned some interesting new things, and he won one of the games. Then afterwards, other players started using this technology to play the game better. And, after the game, Lee Sedol's like, whoa, I just thought it was a probability machine and a machine that was doing calculations. But when I saw that move and played these games, it changed my mind. It was creative. Some of his colleagues have enhanced and decided to play the game with their creativity, with the technology as they go forward. Lee is really interesting. He made a very conscious choice, and he no longer plays professionally. It took him time, but he decided, that's not who I am. That's not my identity. And he was in a situation where he could move away from it. But he was very explicit, clear, and careful about what was the technology doing to him, and is it a choice that he wanted to follow? And so there are important questions here about who am I who might I become, who am I becoming, and who have I become? And again, if we're not intentional and aware of the way these technologies are influencing our skills and our roles and our capabilities and our identity, we will become something before we know it, for better or for worse. Now, that's just generative AI is one technology. Vivian Meng, several years ago, could put a patch on my arm and flip a chemical switch to put chemicals inside of Hal to make me 10% more creative here and now. Or flick a different chemical switch and 10% more productive and focused and efficient now. And with neural implants, what we're talking about is just the beginning of some very complex identity questions that, kind of like me, driving and navigating, what am I losing? What am I taking on? Who am I becoming in that sort of space as we engage with these technologies? So really, really, really important stuff. Any questions on that, Rob, before we move into the final leg of this?
Let's check and see.
We could go long and deep on this, trust me.
Yeah, we'll save questions till the end. So I think it's probably best if you just proceed.
So even without generative AI, when we're letting go of skills, capabilities, roles, and identity, that we're doing something well, we're at the peak of confidence, we're being asked in a transition to leap into a valley of incompetence, where we're starting over, we're taking on completely new stuff. And when that happens, it can be incredibly disorienting. I mean, like seriously disorienting, because none of us want to run away from what we're great at to something we're crappy at, we're not good at. But that's the way, in Carolyn Dweck's words, of growth. That's the way we do this. And I did some research recently where a couple of things going on. It's that I've been asking people about their engagement with AI, and is it increasing or reducing their sense of psychological safety with the technology? And for most people, it does not increase psychological safety. And so there's this real sense of, you're asking me to leap off of a cliff to engage with this technology. And for some people, it's like, it's threatening my job, but I'm scared of that. Like, the folks in Hollywood who are threatened by it, but it's inevitable and they've got to figure out a way for it to come in. They make that leap and it's emotionally incredibly difficult. And that's the final piece here. It's just like, whoa. Like me being depressed in France, this whole technology can do the same to us. But there are ways of managing the depth of that emotional energy going too low. When we're letting go and taking on, we're losing things. It's called grief, loss and grief. Grief is the internal emotional response to loss. With generative AI, we are in the midst of lots of loss right now, but also gains. But loss is real. Roles are changing. Capabilities are losing. We're losing identity. It's like easy to move into that space of anger, denial, and depression. I'm seeing a lot of denial, especially at the senior level, around this generative AI issue. And then it's like, great work, by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on this, but there's a sense of, it's a transition. Moving from here to there is no simple thing. And we've got to mourn, we've got to acknowledge the loss, acknowledge the grief, and then be able to move on. So here are some thoughts around navigating that emotionality. And I remember when I was thinking about my engagement with generative AI, when I was thinking about my questioning capability, I remember when I was reflecting on that intellectually, there was this emotional energy that got pulled out of me as I wasn't paying attention to how the technology was affecting who I am and what I'm becoming. But when I started to pull back into the present and be aware literally of what does it feel like in my head going on right now, and think about it carefully, it's like, whoa, something's going on here. And this is the suggestion. It's like, am I present? Am I not living in the past, not afraid, too anxious of the future? That's what's going on here and now. We're all the best scientists of our own world. Seriously. Be one right now more than ever before. Then it's like, what am I feeling? Feelings are the incredible indicators of what's really going on. It's a way of tapping into the unconscious, like what's really going on inside about this stuff. And then finally, it's like, can we talk about it? Easier, again, said than done. I say this because one of the key figures in this world going forward has past and forward is Dr. Lisa Su at AMD, the CEO there. Early on in her career, someone asked him, do you talk with your people? And she's like, yes, I talk to my people. But how often? Well, all the time. But do you ever ask them how you feel, how they feel? She's like, am I supposed to ask that? I was treating people the way I expected to be treated. I don't expect anybody to ask me how I feel. I just expect to talk about the work. She's changed that radically. And it was really fascinating at Chanel last week with Lena Nair, the CEO, wandering through this group of 200 people, having a real sense of empathy and emotional connection to those people, even though it was quick. You could sense that she, like Dr. Lisa Su, had learned the importance of paying careful attention to this empathy, this sense of emotion that's part of change and transition. So are you present right now? How do you feel about the transition? Are you talking about your feelings? And I'm not suggesting that you become a therapist if you're a manager. If it's deep, difficult stuff, go to a professional. But at least talk about the real stuff. That's what we're talking about here. So these are the four elements that I don't know what your change model is, and I respect it and I honor it. And I'm suggesting, based upon the research that I have done and am doing with Ed Kaplan and others now, it's just like there's some interesting other things going on with technology that forces us to think and rethink our framework and to start navigating it more effectively. And yeah, maybe we'll leave it at that for now. Rob, questions coming in?
Hal, I've seen several kind of come through in terms of how individuals may struggle with the change and the loss that you mentioned. But I'm also wondering what your thoughts are on organizational culture and how that's important. And I know you talk a lot in your programs about psychological safety. Can you talk a little bit about beyond the individual's processing of this transition framework? What aspects of organizational culture are important in light of all you've discussed?
Well, actually, Rob, I honestly think that falls right into Nikki Sparshot's lab. because she was dealing with all of this stuff individually, but she was also dealing with it with other people, because a week before the COVID lockdown in 2020, she became at that point, she was the CEO of T2T. She became the CEO of Unilever ANZ, working with people she'd never known before. So she had to pay attention to some identity, capability, and role issues for herself and others. And in the capability area, this is about the other part. It's like she would always start meetings with what and how. But she was incredibly self-reflective that may not be helpful right now during the beginning of a pandemic where we're talking through a screen. And so she literally, intentionally changed her skill and approach of questioning from what, how to who, why. And she did that for other people, for her team. And it influenced her relationships and their effectiveness and what they were saying, weren't saying. And it enabled them to be more psychologically safe with her, because once they sensed she understood who I am and why I am, then we could talk about what and how in a safer space. And last week at Chanel, Amy Edmonds was there the day before. I was working with the group, and it's all about psychological safety is a means to an end. We're not trying to make an easy world. We're trying to make it safe enough to take on difficult, tough challenges like generative AI. And it's so fascinating to me that Nikki, even in that role, it was not just about her. It was about how is this technology and this world influencing us? How is this influencing my skills and the capabilities and roles? And then at the end of the day, she's literally taken on this sense of transformation. That's what this stuff is about. And she's like, if you've got the right positive intent in the room, people feel confident, they can share their opinion, that's when the magic happens. You create the right psychologically safe space, harness the tensions between where we were and where we're going in a positive way, And she's now moved into the role because her identity in the last 5 years has changed to, I am actually a transformation agent. And that's what her role is now across all of Unilever. In the midst of this technology change, like everyone on this webinar is involved with, but change starts inside out. You change individuals, you change organizations. Nikki gets this. And that's the intent here is like, yes, the broader world, it absolutely matters.
Hal, you've done a wonderful job. I know it was a very tall order, a big ask when we asked you to distill so much information into just a 1-hour webinar. In the few minutes that we have left, I know that your programs here at MIT run in the classroom, they run online as well. Can you share a little bit about when you have more time? You talked about spending 2 days to tackle on this topic. What are you able to do with more time in terms of exploring these topics more deeply?
Well, imagine being not 2,000 people, but maybe 30 or 40 people or more, maybe 50, but imagine being in space interactively, this way or physically live, where everyone is bringing their change and transitions to that space. And we're spending 2 days doing a really deep dive on, in this case, the content would be these 4 elements of navigating transitions, a much richer, deeper dive on what do they actually mean? What are some examples? How might the technology be employed that we're talking about? And as you well know, Rob and others, half of the learning is going to be with other people who are incredibly good at what they're doing like you. And that collective problem solving finding is just powerful. And so we literally imagine spending a 90-minute session where 60 minutes of that session is around, whoa, this is really true. My identity is shifting and changing in this world of generative AI. And this is where I am on that curve, and I'm a little bit stuck. So now let's talk with 2 other people who care about me and these issues, and it's safe to talk with them about our specific 3 situations. And imagine through the course of 2 days doing that over and over and over. And at the end of it, it feels like very individual work, but people inevitably walk away from that experience becoming close friends with those people in that room, committed to each other's challenges going forward, and colleagues as they navigate these transitions. And the final thing I would add is it's related to this, Rob. It's just really quickly. Jonas Salk, who invented the vaccine for polio decades ago, was once asked, why didn't he, make a bucket of money and patent that vaccine? He didn't do that. He's like, are we being good ancestors? That wouldn't be a good ancestor to me. And I'm not saying making money is bad, but it's a really interesting question. And so in the spirit of this sense of we're all part of bigger families, we're all part of a big family on planet Earth, and we're in the midst of arguably some really big challenges, and generative AI and AI in general can help create those challenges and it can help solve them. And my honest hope for all of us here, even if you don't make it to a 2-day program, that 60 minutes hopefully has helped you get a little different frame, a little different view on how to be, with me, a little better ancestor to this next generation who's inheriting our challenges, and they need these tools in order to do great work going forward.
And Hal, that's just a wonderful place to leave it today. I know we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank you. I know that you were struggling a little bit with your voice. So for putting the effort to be with us today, to be with this large global audience, to share your perspective. I know that I certainly found it helpful, as I always do when I'm working with you. I hope that everybody that's joined us has found it equally helpful and have some really key principles and takeaways that you can start to use immediately in your professional role, in your personal role. As you'll see here, Hal has a number of programs that are coming up here at MIT Sloan Executive Education. We'd be delighted to have you for more time joining us in our classrooms here on campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or virtual classrooms as well. A reminder that a link will be sent out with a recording to today's webinar that you can review it again, share it with your colleagues. We're also going to ask Hal to compile a reading list because I know many of you were interested in several of the books that he referenced. So we'll be sure to include that as well. Thank you for spending your hour with us. We hope to see you back here at MIT again, online or in person. Hal, thank you. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks to everyone else.